Imagine, if you will, the sound of a steady, rhythmic wind blowing across the high grasses of the Sahel, a sound that has remained unchanged for 1,000 years. It is a dry, whispering song that carries the scent of sun-baked earth and the faint, sweet aroma of acacia blossoms. Long before the maps of the world were filled with the borders we recognize today, there existed a kingdom so vast and so radiant that it was spoken of in hushed, reverent tones from the markets of Cairo to the palaces of Venice. This was the Mali Empire in the early 14th century, a golden age in every sense of the word, where the horizon seemed to stretch into infinity and the earth itself felt heavy with the promise of hidden treasures. To understand the world of Mansa Musa, one must first visualize the sheer scale of his domain. The empire was not merely a country, but a sprawling tapestry of landscapes that reached from the salt-sprayed shores of the Atlantic Ocean in the west all the way across the burning sands and fertile plains to the great bend of the Niger River. It was a land of profound contrasts, where the emerald green of the river valleys met the shimmering copper-colored dunes of the Sahara. The air here is thick with the heat of the afternoon, yet as evening approaches, a cool stillness settles over the savannah, and the stars begin to emerge with a clarity that feels almost intimate. Beneath the feet of the traders and the farmers lay the secret to Mali's unimaginable power. The ground was rich with gold, veins of it running like frozen sunlight through the rock, waiting to be brought to the surface. It was said that in certain parts of the empire, gold was so plentiful that it could be traded for its weight in salt, a commodity just as precious for those living under the relentless sun. This was a place of immense terrestrial wealth, but it was also a place of deep intellectual and spiritual ambition, where the flow of the river was matched only by the flow of ideas and culture between the great cities of the interior. As you settle into your blankets and find a comfortable position for the night, you might find yourself drifting along these ancient trade routes. If you are enjoying this journey through time and finding a sense of peace in these stories, I would like to welcome you to the Slumber Archives. We gather here every single day to share new narrations from the long corridors of history, each one designed to help you find rest. If you would like to join our growing community of nightly travelers, please do consider subscribing so you never miss a story, and perhaps leave a like to help others discover these quiet moments of reflection. It is a pleasure to have you with us as we return now to the dusty roads of West Africa. The story of this empire did not begin with Musa, but rather with his ancestor, the legendary Sundiata Keita, known to history as the Lion King of Mali. Generations before Musa took the throne, Sundiata had transformed a small collection of Mandinka chiefdoms into a unified, formidable superpower. He was a figure of mythic proportions, a man who, according to the oral traditions of the griots, overcame a childhood of physical hardship to lead his people toward a destiny of greatness. It was Sundiata who laid the foundations of the empire's laws and its spirit of tolerance, ensuring that the diverse peoples living within its borders could thrive in a state of relative peace and stability. By the time the 14th century dawned, the lineage of the Keita dynasty had cultivated a society that was remarkably sophisticated. The Mali Empire was a hub of global commerce, where caravans of thousands of camels moved like slow, steady pulses across the desert, carrying ivory, textiles, and precious metals. The wealth of the empire was not just in its gold, but in its ability to connect the world. The kings of Mali, known by the title of Mansa, were not merely rulers. They were the guardians of the gateway between the heart of Africa and the Mediterranean world. Mansa Musa was born into this world of abundance, inheriting a legacy of strength and a kingdom that was already the envy of the known world. He was a man of deep faith and quiet intellect, described by those who met him as a tall, imposing figure, with a calm demeanor and a voice that commanded attention without ever needing to be raised. As he looked out from his palace in the capital city of Niani, he would have seen a landscape of bustling markets and quiet gardens, a place where the sound of children playing in the streets mingled with the rhythmic chanting of scholars in the nearby mosques. The geography of his realm was as diverse as the people who inhabited it. To the south lay the thick, humid forests, where the air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and ancient wood. To the north sat the edge of the great desert, a sea of sand that shifted and changed with every passing breeze, and in the center, like a life-giving vein, was the Niger River, a wide, slow-moving body of water that provided the lifeblood for the empire's agriculture and its transport. The river was a mirror, reflecting the vast, pale blue of the African sky during the day and the deep, velvet purple of the night. As the years passed, Musa's vision for his empire began to expand beyond the borders of West Africa. He understood that while Mali was a superpower in its own right, its true potential lay in its connection to the wider world of Islam and the intellectual centers of the East. He was a king who looked toward the horizon, not with a desire for conquest, but with a thirst for knowledge and a wish to place his kingdom firmly on the maps of the great cartographers of Europe and Asia. The legacy of the Keita family was one of building, not just of walls and palaces, but of systems and traditions that could endure for centuries. They built a world where a traveler could walk from one end of the empire to the other without fear, a feat that was rare in the turbulent 14th century. The peace of Mali was a tangible thing. It was the quiet of a well-tended field, the steady pace of a merchant's donkey, and the soft rustle of parchment as a scholar turned a page in a library in Timbuktu. As we prepare to follow Mansa Musa on his most famous journey, we must first appreciate the stillness of this golden horizon. The empire stands at its peak, a monument to human ingenuity and the riches of the earth. The sun sets slowly over the Sahel, casting long amber shadows across the grass, and the world of the 14th century waits in anticipation for the king who would soon turn the eyes of the entire world toward the west. The air is cool now, the firelight flickers in the distance, and the story of the richest man to ever live begins to unfold in the quiet of the African night. In the quiet corridors of the palace at Niani, there is a certain weight to the silence that follows a great departure. It is the year 1312, and the air carries the scent of dry earth and the faint, sweet aroma of acacia blossoms. For months, the court has been a whirlwind of preparation, a symphony of hammering wood and the rhythmic chanting of sailors. But now, the riverbanks are still. Abu Bakr II, the visionary king who dreamt of what lay beyond the horizon, has vanished into the vast blue embrace of the Atlantic. He did not leave with a single vessel, but with a fleet of 2,000 ships, their sails like white clouds drifting toward the edge of the world. He sought the limits of the great ocean, driven by a curiosity that outweighed his desire for a throne. And in his absence, he left the keys to the greatest empire in Africa in the hands of his trusted deputy, a young man named Musa. Musa did not seize the crown through conquest or palace intrigue. His rise was a steady, quiet transition, born from a tradition of stability. In the Mali Empire, it was custom for the king to appoint a deputy whenever he embarked on a long journey, a regent who would watch over the hearth and the harvest until the sovereign returned. Musa was that deputy, a man of quiet competence and royal lineage, being the grandson of the great Sundiata Keita's brother. He sat upon the throne not as an usurper, but as a steward, waiting for a fleet that would never return. As the weeks turned into months, and the months into a year, the realization began to settle over the court like a soft morning mist. The horizon remained empty. The king was gone, lost to the mysteries of the sea, and by the laws of the land, the deputy now became the 10th Mansa, the king of kings, The transition of power was as smooth as the flow of the Niger River during the rainy season. There was no upheaval, no clashing of swords in the night. Musa stepped into his new role with a calm dignity that would define his entire 4-decade reign. He inherited an empire that was already vast, stretching across the golden savannas and the dense green fringes of the forests, but it was a realm that required a delicate hand to maintain. To be a Mansa was to be more than a ruler. It was to be the sun around which 100 smaller stars rotated. The empire was a complex tapestry of kingdoms, provinces, and city-states, each with its own traditions and local leaders, all bound together by the central authority in Niani. In these early years, Musa focused his intellect on the internal architecture of his domain. He understood that a house is only as strong as its foundation, and so he set about refining the administrative structure that held Mali together. He did not rule through fear, but through a sophisticated system of governors and inspectors. These officials, often chosen for their loyalty and wisdom, acted as the eyes and ears of the Mansa. They ensured that justice was fair, that the trade routes remained safe from bandits, and that the tribute flowed steadily into the royal coffers. It was a period of immense consolidation, where the disparate pieces of the empire were woven into a single, cohesive entity. The roads grew busy with merchants, and the marketplaces hummed with the sounds of a dozen different languages, all coexisting under the protective shadow of Musa's peace. The stability of these early years was not an accident of history, but the result of Musa's temperament. He was a man who favored the pen and the word over the spear. While he maintained a massive army, a force of 100,000 men, including 10,000 cavalry riders on swift Arabian horses, he rarely felt the need to unleash them. The mere knowledge of their existence was often enough to keep the peace. Instead, he spent his time listening. He listened to the grievances of the farmers, who brought their grievances to the palace gates. He listened to the scholars, who travelled from distant lands to share their knowledge. And he listened to the silence of the desert, where the true wealth of his kingdom lay buried in the sand. During this time, the empire's wealth began to grow in a way that the world had never seen before. Mali sat atop 3 of the largest gold mines in the known world, Bambouk, Bouré, and Galam. It was said that in Mali, gold grew like plants in the earth, waiting to be plucked. But Musa knew that gold alone does not make an empire great. It was the salt from the northern mines of Takhaza, traded weight for weight with the gold of the south, that fueled the economy. He managed these resources with a meticulous grace, ensuring that the flow of trade remained uninterrupted. He lowered taxes on the common people while increasing the efficiency of the royal monopolies, creating a society where even the humblest citizen felt the warmth of the empire's prosperity. As the years passed, Musa's reputation as a fair and pious ruler began to spread far beyond the borders of West Africa. He was a devout Muslim, and he integrated his faith into his governance with a gentle touch. He encouraged the building of mosques and the study of the Quran, but he also respected the ancient, traditional beliefs of his people, understanding that the strength of Mali lay in its diversity. This balance created a social harmony that was rare in the Middle Ages. In the bustling streets of Niani, one could see the blending of cultures, the vibrant colors of local textiles mingling with the white robes of North African traders. It was a golden age in every sense of the word, a time when the empire breathed with a rhythmic, steady heartbeat. Musa himself lived a life of measured luxury. He moved through his palace with a quiet grace, surrounded by the finest crafts the world could offer. Ivory carvings from the south, silk tapestries from the east, and ornaments of hammered gold that shimmered in the lamplight. Yet, despite his immense power, those who wrote of him noted his humility. He was a man who preferred the company of thinkers and poets to the empty flattery of courtiers. He spent long evenings under the starlit sky, discussing the movements of the planets and the philosophies of the ancients, his mind always reaching outward, much like the king who had preceded him. The first decade of his reign was a long, slow exhale of breath. While the rest of the world was often embroiled in the chaos of war and the pressures of famine, Mali remained an island of tranquility. The granaries were full, the gold reserves were overflowing, and the borders were secure. But Musa was not a man to be content with mere domestic comfort. He felt the pull of the wider world, a calling that whispered to him across the dunes of the Sahara. He knew that to truly elevate his people, he had to connect Mali to the great intellectual and spiritual centers of the Mediterranean and the Middle East. He began to dream of a journey, not a voyage into the unknown ocean like Abu Bakr, but a pilgrimage across the familiar, shifting sands of the desert. It would be a journey of faith, but also a journey of diplomacy and grand ambition. He would show the world that the land of the sunset was not a dark, mysterious edge of the earth, but a beacon of light and civilization. As he sat in his garden, watching the shadows of the palms lengthen across the red earth, he began to plan the most extravagant procession in human history. It was a plan that would take years to finalize, requiring the coordination of thousands of people and the gathering of unimaginable quantities of treasure. And so, the quiet years of consolidation came to a close, and the era of the Great Migration began. The peace he had fostered at home would be the foundation upon which his international legacy would be built. The world was about to wake up to the reality of Mali, and the man who wore the crown was ready to lead his people onto the global stage. The air in Niani grew thick with the excitement of 1,000 travelers preparing their kits, and the jingling of camel bells began to echo through the streets, a soft, metallic music that heralded the beginning of an epic. The king was no longer just a deputy or a steward. He was a visionary, preparing to walk across the world and leave a trail of gold in his wake. The logistics of such an undertaking began not with a map, but with a whisper of movement that rippled through the heart of the empire as the call went out to every corner of the Mandan Kurufaba. It was a summons that reached the gold miners of Bambuk, the scholars of Timbuktu, and the desert-hardened riders of the north, drawing them toward the capital of Niani, like water flowing toward a great central well. Imagine, if you will, the sheer weight of preparation required to move an entire civilization across the shifting sands of the Sahara. This was not merely a pilgrimage, it was the assembly of a moving city, a nomadic kingdom that would carry the pride and the piety of Mali across thousands of miles of unforgiving terrain. Mansa Musa understood that to represent the majesty of his faith, the procession had to be more than just large. It had to be a living testament to the abundance of his land. And so, the caravan began to grow, day by day, until 60,000 souls stood ready to depart. It is a number that almost defies the imagination, a human tide that stretched as far as the eye could see across the savannah. Among them were 12,000 servants, each dressed in tunics of fine Persian silk and brocade, their garments shimmering in the soft morning light like a field of wildflowers. They carried with them staffs of solid gold, which they used to clear the path ahead, their rhythmic footsteps creating a steady, grounding drumbeat for the journey to come. But the true weight of the empire's wealth lay upon the backs of the animals. 80 camels were selected from the royal herds, sturdy and patient beasts capable of enduring the long, dry stretches between the desert oases. Each of these 80 camels was burdened with 300 pounds of pure gold dust, packed into sturdy leather bags that swayed with every slow, deliberate step. The gold was not meant for trade alone, but as a gift to the world, a river of wealth that would soon flow into the hands of the poor, the builders of mosques, and the rulers of distant lands. The sight of these 80 camels, shimmering under the weight of 24,000 pounds of gold, must have felt like a dream to those who witnessed the departure, a golden mirage that was, in truth, entirely real. Feeding and sheltering 60,000 people in the middle of a desert is a feat of engineering that would challenge even a modern commander. Mansa Musa's planners had to account for every grain of rice, every skin of water, and every blade of fodder for the thousands of horses and livestock that followed the main body of the caravan. They moved with the seasons, timing their departure to ensure that the wells along the ancient trade routes would be full enough to sustain them. Behind the soldiers and the servants came the merchants, bringing with them the trade goods of West Africa, salt, cola nuts, and fine textiles, to ensure the caravan remained self-sufficient. There were also the scholars and the jurists, men of deep learning who spent their days on camelback discussing the intricacies of law and the beauty of the heavens. Mansa Musa valued the mind as much as the treasury, and he ensured that his journey was filled with the soft murmur of debate and the recitation of poetry. It was a quiet, intellectual music that balanced the clatter of swords and the lowing of the cattle. As they moved, the caravan became a mobile university, a place where ideas were exchanged as freely as gold, and where the wisdom of the Sahel began to mingle with the traditions of the wider Islamic world. The king himself travelled in a manner befitting the Lion of Mali. He was surrounded by a personal guard of 500 men, each carrying a golden spear that caught the rays of the sun, casting long, flickering shadows across the red earth. He sat upon a magnificent horse, draped in the finest fabrics the world could provide, yet his gaze remained fixed on the horizon. He was leaving behind the security of his palace and the familiar comforts of his court for the vast, silent uncertainty of the desert. There is a specific kind of stillness that settles over a camp of 60,000 people as the fires die down for the night, a collective breathing that sounds like the wind through the tall grasses. In those quiet moments, under a canopy of stars that seemed close enough to touch, the magnitude of the journey must have felt both humbling and divine. The logistics extended even to the creation of comfort in the wild. Great tents of heavy canvas and embroidered silk were carried on the backs of additional pack animals, ready to be erected at a moment's notice to provide shade for the king and his advisers. Every Friday, wherever the caravan found itself, Mansa Musa ordered the construction of a mosque. These were not always permanent structures of stone and clay, but often sacred spaces carved out of the desert itself, where the community could gather in prayer and reflection before continuing their trek. It was a reminder that even in the midst of such immense worldly power, the purpose of the journey was spiritual, a slow, rhythmic march toward a higher understanding. As the caravan finally turned its back on the lush greenery of the Niger River Valley and began to face the encroaching sands, the atmosphere shifted. The air became drier, the scents of wood smoke and damp earth replaced by the clean, sharp smell of sun-warmed stone. The pace slowed to the steady, hypnotic walk of the camel, a gait that lulls the mind into a state of deep contemplation. The jingling of the harnesses and the soft thud of thousands of feet on the sand became the soundtrack of their lives. They were a city in motion, a golden thread being woven into the fabric of the Sahara. The soldiers kept a watchful eye on the horizon, for though the Mansa was powerful, the desert was a realm of its own, governed by the wind and the heat. Yet there was a sense of profound peace within the ranks. They were led by a man who believed in the impossible, who had gathered the wealth of a continent to share it with the world. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the dunes and the sky turned a deep, bruised purple, the camp would erupt in the sounds of preparation, the clinking of cooking pots, the low chatter of friends, and the rhythmic chanting of the evening prayers. It was a community bound together by a singular vision, moving through the silence of the wasteland like a vibrant, living organism. The sheer scale of the caravan meant that the vanguard would often be reaching the next watering hole, while the rear was still breaking camp miles behind. Communication was maintained by swift riders who darted back and forth along the line, their horses kicking up plumes of dust that hung in the still air. They carried messages of logistics, of health, and of the king's will, ensuring that this massive human machine remained synchronized. It was a masterpiece of coordination, a testament to the administrative brilliance of the Malian Empire. And so, the great caravan pressed on, leaving the borders of Mali behind and entering the vast, open spaces of the world. They were no longer just a king and his subjects. They were ambassadors of a golden age, carrying the light of their civilization into the unknown. The golden dust in the bags of the 80 camels was heavy, yes, but it was light compared to the hopes and dreams of the 60,000 travelers who walked beside them, their eyes fixed on the distant holy city that lay at the end of the world's longest road. The soft, rhythmic crunch of sand beneath thousands of feet becomes the heartbeat of the caravan, a steady, hypnotic pulse that marks the passage of time where clocks have no meaning. To enter the Sahara is to leave the world of green and water behind, stepping into a landscape that feels less like earth and more like an ocean of frozen light. There is a specific silence that lives in the deep desert, a silence so profound that the jingle of a horse's bridle or the low murmur of a traveller's prayer seems to travel for miles, shimmering across the dunes like a physical thing. Life within this moving city settles into a predictable, meditative cadence. Long before the first light of dawn touches the crests of the dunes, the camp begins to stir. The smell of wood smoke from small, controlled fires mingles with the scent of roasted grains and dried fruits, the simple sustenance required for the day's labor. There is no haste here, for haste is an enemy in the heat. Instead, there is a deliberate, measured grace to every movement. The servants and soldiers, the scholars and the king, all move in a collective flow, packing the ornate tents and securing the heavy loads of gold and salt onto the backs of the camels with practiced hands. They are a civilization in motion, a tapestry of Malian culture unrolling across the barren waste. As the sun climbs, the caravan becomes a shimmering line of white and gold against the burnt orange of the sand. The heat begins to hum, creating a haze that blurs the horizon, but the pace does not falter. Mansa Musa travels in the center of this great procession, often seated upon a litter carried by his strongest men, or riding a horse draped in silks that catch the stray desert breezes. He is surrounded by his court, men who carry the oral histories of their people, reciting the lineages of kings and the triumphs of ancestors, to pass the long hours of trekking. Their voices rise and fall in a melodic chant, a sound that anchors the travelers to their identity, even as the familiar landmarks of their homeland fade into the distant haze. Navigation in this sea of sand is a sacred art, entrusted to the seasoned desert guides known as the takshif. These men are the masters of the invisible paths, reading the ripples of the dunes and the subtle shifts in the color of the earth as if they were reading the pages of a book. They understand the language of the wind, knowing when a storm is brewing long before the sky turns grey. But it is at night that their true wisdom shines. When the heat finally breaks and the sky transforms into a velvet canopy of indigo, the caravan halts, and the guides turn their eyes upward. They navigate by the stars, those cold, bright lanterns that have guided travelers since the beginning of time. The North Star becomes their constant companion, a fixed point of hope in a world that is constantly shifting beneath their feet. There is a psychological weight to this crossing, a slow stretching of the spirit that occurs when one is surrounded by nothing but the infinite. For months, the horizon remains the same, a flat line of possibility and peril. The travelers must find comfort in the small things, the cool touch of water from a goatskin bag, the shared laughter over a communal bowl of rice in the evening, or the sight of a desert flower blooming miraculously in the shadow of a rock. Endurance becomes a form of worship, They are not merely walking to Cairo, they are proving the strength of their resolve, shedding the distractions of the courtly life and finding a deeper, quieter strength within themselves. Occasionally, this great gold-laden river of people encounters the nomadic tribes of the desert, the Tuareg and other Saharan wanderers who move like ghosts through the dunes. These meetings are moments of profound cultural exchange. Imagine the wonder of a desert nomad, accustomed to the harsh scarcity of the sands, suddenly coming across a king who travels with 60,000 people and enough gold to buy a kingdom. Mansa Musa, ever the diplomat and the devout seeker, treats these encounters with a quiet generosity. He shares the riches of Mali, not just the gold, but the stories, the songs, and the sophisticated Islamic scholarship that has flourished in Timbuktu and Niani. In these moments, the caravan acts as a bridge, connecting the isolated heart of the desert to the wider world. They exchange salt for information, dried meat for news of the road ahead, and in doing so, they weave the Malian Empire into the very fabric of the Sahara. The nomads, in turn, share their knowledge of hidden wells and ancient shortcuts, secrets passed down through generations that ensure the caravan's survival. It is a delicate dance of mutual respect, a reminder that even in the most desolate places on earth, humanity finds a way to reach out and connect. As the weeks turn into months, the physical toll of the journey begins to manifest in the weathered faces and the frayed edges of the fine silks, yet the spirit of the caravan remains unbroken. There is a sense of collective destiny that keeps them moving forward. They are carrying the reputation of their king on their shoulders, and they know that the eyes of the world will soon be upon them. The gold they carry is heavy, but the stories they are creating are even weightier. They speak of the great rivers of home, the Niger and the Senegal, comparing the life-giving waters of their youth to the dry, whispering winds of the present. The evening camps are places of rest and reflection. As the stars wheel overhead, the scholars in the king's retinue gather to discuss theology, law, and astronomy, their voices low and thoughtful. This is the intellectual heart of the pilgrimage, a traveling university that never stops learning. They study the heavens and the earth, finding patterns in the chaos of the desert. The king himself often joins these circles, listening more than he speaks, his mind already turning toward the great mosques and libraries he hopes to visit in the north. The desert has a way of stripping away the ego, leaving only the essential truths of faith and purpose. And so, the caravan presses on, a long winding thread of gold stitching the south to the north. They move through the great erg of the desert, where the dunes rise like mountains, and across the flat, salt-crusted plains, where the heat creates shimmering illusions of lakes that are never there. Through it all, the rhythm remains, the steady walk, the evening prayer, the cold nights under a million stars, and the quiet, persistent hope that just over the next horizon, the green valley of the Nile is waiting to welcome them. The Saharan crossing is not just a physical journey. It is a transformation, a slow tempering of the soul in the forge of the sun and the silence, preparing them for the splendors and the challenges that await in the ancient city of Cairo. The scent of jasmine and the damp, sweet earth of the riverbanks heralds their arrival long before the city walls come into view. Cairo, the jewel of the Mamluk Sultanate, is a sprawling labyrinth of limestone and light, a place where the scholarship of centuries meets the frantic energy of the world's most vibrant markets. As the massive caravan of Mansa Musa finally settles into the outskirts of the city, the air is thick with anticipation, and the sheer scale of the Malian presence begins to ripple through the crowded streets like a stone cast into a still pond. The year is 1324, and the world is about to witness an encounter that will be whispered about in the coffee houses and palaces of the Mediterranean for generations. Musa is a man of deep faith and quiet dignity, yet his arrival is anything but subtle. He comes not as a humble traveller, but as a sovereign of a realm so vast and wealthy that his very presence threatens to overwhelm the local economy. However, before the gold can flow, there is the matter of protocol, a delicate dance of power and ego that must take place within the shadowed halls of the citadel. The Sultan of Egypt, Al-Nasir Muhammad, is a formidable ruler in his own right, and the meeting between these two titans is fraught with the tension of tradition. When Musa is invited to the court, he is expected to perform the customary act of prostration, to bow low and kiss the ground before the Sultan. For a man who considers himself the shadow of God on earth in his own land, this is a moment of profound internal conflict. Musa hesitates. He lingers in the doorway of the great hall, his face a mask of calm contemplation. He explains, with a soft but firm voice, that he prostrates before God alone. It is a moment where the breath of the court catches, a silence that stretches thin, until a compromise of dignity is reached. Musa offers a gesture of respect that satisfies the Sultan without compromising his own divine mandate, and the tension dissolves into an exchange of lavish gifts and mutual admiration. Once the formalities of the palace are concluded, the true spectacle begins. Musa is not a man to hoard his treasures. He views his wealth as a tool for piety and a means to leave a legacy of benevolence. He begins to move through the city of Cairo, and with him comes a rain of gold such as the world has never seen. He gives to the mosques, to the government officials, and most notably, to the poor who line the dusty streets. Every person who crosses his path seems to find their hands filled with gold dust or heavy coins. Imagine the scene. The narrow, shaded alleyways of the market, the sunlight filtering through wooden slats above, and the king passing through on his horse, his robes of gold-woven silk shimmering in the half-light. His servants carry bags of gold, and with a casual, rhythmic grace they distribute it to the widows, the orphans, and the labourers. To Musa, this is an act of supreme devotion, a cleansing of his spirit before he reaches the holy city of Mecca. But to the merchants of Cairo, it is an opportunity of a lifetime. They see the foreigners coming with their endless supply of precious metal, and they raise their prices to astronomical heights. The Malian travellers, perhaps unaccustomed to the shrewd bargaining of the Egyptian markets, or perhaps simply too wealthy to care, pay whatever is asked. The city becomes intoxicated by this sudden influx of wealth. For a few weeks, it feels as though the very air of Cairo has turned to gold. But beneath the celebration, a quiet catastrophe is brewing. The basic laws of supply and demand are indifferent to the piety of a king. By flooding the Egyptian market with so much gold, Musa inadvertently causes its value to plummet. The metal that was once the bedrock of the region's economy becomes suddenly common, almost mundane. As the months pass and the caravan eventually moves on toward the Red Sea, the people of Cairo find themselves in a strange and difficult position. The price of bread, cloth, and oil has skyrocketed to match the abundance of gold, but now that the king is gone, the prices do not fall. The value of gold in Egypt and the surrounding regions drops so significantly that it will take over a decade for the economy to fully recover. It is perhaps the only time in recorded history that a single man, through sheer acts of charity, accidentally broke the economy of a major world power. Yet while the financiers and treasurers of Cairo may have fretted over their ledgers, the legend of Mansa Musa was only just beginning to take flight. News of the Golden King travelled faster than the caravan itself. It moved north with the spice merchants and the silk traders, crossing the Mediterranean on the decks of Venetian galleys and Genoese merchant ships. In the royal courts of Europe, where gold was often a rare and coveted thing, stories of a king from the heart of Africa who gave away fortunes as if they were pebbles began to take on a mythical quality. Cartographers in Majorca and Italy began to redraw their maps of the world, looking toward the vast expanse of the Sahara with newfound curiosity. They began to sketch a figure sitting on a golden throne in the center of the African continent, holding a scepter and a large gold coin, a visual representation of a land they had previously considered a void. The name of Mali, once a distant and whispered word, was now etched into the consciousness of the Western world. Musa had not just performed a pilgrimage, he had conducted a masterclass in soft power, shifting the center of gravity of the medieval world toward the south. He was no longer just a king of a distant desert, he was the richest man in human history, a figure of such immense gravity that he pulled the eyes of the world toward the Niger River. As he leaves Cairo behind, heading toward the final leg of his journey to the holy sites, the dust of his caravan begins to settle, but the ripples of his passage continue to expand. The gold he left behind may have devalued the currency, but it bought him a place in the eternal memory of the Mediterranean. People talk of him in the ports of Spain, in the universities of Morocco, and in the counting houses of Florence. They speak of his dignity, his piety, and the sheer, overwhelming scale of his generosity. The journey continues now through the shifting sands of the Sinai toward the heat of the Arabian Peninsula. The pace is slow, the sun is relentless, but the spirit of the caravan is buoyed by the knowledge that they have already changed the world. Behind them, the Nile flows silently toward the sea, carrying with it the stories of the king who turned a city to gold, while ahead, the sacred destination finally begins to shimmer on the horizon. A place where even the richest king on earth must walk as a simple man, stripped of his finery, seeking something that gold can never buy. The white robes of the pilgrim, simple and unadorned, feel light against the skin after years of wearing heavy silks and gold-threaded brocades. In the valley of Mecca, the distinctions of the world seem to dissolve like salt in water. Here, the king of Mali is no longer a sovereign of infinite reach, but a single soul among hundreds of thousands, circling the Kaaba in a rhythmic ancient dance of devotion. The heat of the Arabian sun is a constant presence, yet it is said that Musa finds a profound sense of cooling peace within the sacred precincts. He spends his days in quiet contemplation, reflecting on the vastness of the world he has crossed and the weight of the crown he left behind in Niani. The gold he brought was a tool for the world, but here, in the silence of prayer, he seeks a different kind of wealth, a clarity of spirit that transcends the material treasures of the earth. As the rituals of the Hajj draw to a close, Musa's mind begins to turn toward the future of his empire. He realizes that while he has brought the glory of Mali to the world, he must now bring the wisdom of the world back to Mali. He spends his afternoons in the shade of the great mosques, speaking with scholars, poets, and thinkers who have traveled from the furthest corners of the Islamic world. It is during these quiet, scholarly exchanges that he meets a man who will forever change the skyline of West Africa. Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, a poet and architect from the vibrant city of Granada in Andalusia, possesses a vision that captivates the king. Al-Sahili speaks of soaring arches, of geometric precision, and of buildings that can breathe with the desert winds. Musa, recognizing a kindred spirit, invites the architect to join his caravan, promising him a life of prestige and the opportunity to build a legacy in a land where the earth itself is waiting to be shaped into something eternal. The journey home, however, is not the triumphant procession of the arrival. The desert is a fickle companion, and the return trek across the Sahara proves to be a grueling test of endurance. The caravan, once so heavy with gold, is now burdened by the weight of books. Hundreds of leather-bound manuscripts containing the secrets of medicine, law, astronomy, and mathematics. These are the new treasures of the king. But as they move through the shifting sands, the supplies begin to dwindle. The water skins grow light, and the winds howl with a ferocity that threatens to swallow the path. It is a slow, methodical march, where every mile is earned with sweat and prayer. Yet even in the face of hardship, Musa remains resolute. He is no longer just a king returning to his palace. He is a shepherd leading a new era of enlightenment toward the banks of the Niger River. As the caravan nears the edges of the Mali Empire, news reaches the king of a significant development. His generals have secured the city of Gao, a vital trading hub on the river, and the influential city of Timbuktu has also come under his sovereignty. Rather than rushing home to his capital, Musa diverts his massive entourage toward these new acquisitions. He sees in Timbuktu not just a prize of war, but a blank canvas. He walks through the dusty streets of the city, feeling the dry heat and the pulse of the river nearby, and he begins to imagine a center of learning that will rival Cairo and Baghdad. He stands with Abu Ishaq al-Sahili on the red earth and gestures to the horizon, describing a mosque that will stand as a beacon for centuries to come. It is here that the architectural transformation of West Africa begins. Al-Sahili introduces a revolutionary technique, moving away from the traditional timber-heavy constructions to the use of burnt bricks and a unique blend of mud and straw plaster. Under the king's watchful eye, the foundations of the Jingwereber Mosque are laid. The building rises from the ground like a natural extension of the earth, its conical towers and protruding wooden beams creating a silhouette that is both majestic and grounded. The interior is a forest of pillars, cool and dim, where the air remains still even in the height of the afternoon sun. This is the birth of the Sudano-Sahelian style, a marriage of Andalusian elegance and African soul that will define the region's identity for 1,000 years. Meanwhile, the scholars Musa recruited begin to settle into their new home. They are not merely guests, but the architects of a new intellectual frontier. They bring with them the tradition of the madrasa, and soon the Sankore University begins to take shape. It is a quiet, scholarly revolution. In the courtyards of Timbuktu, the sound of gold coins clinking is replaced by the scratching of quills on parchment and the low murmur of students reciting verses. Musa ensures that these men of learning are provided for, granting them estates and the freedom to pursue their studies. He understands that a kingdom's true strength lies not in the gold that leaves its borders, but in the knowledge that takes root within them. The return to the capital of Niani is eventually met with great celebration, but the king who returns is different from the one who left. He has seen the complexity of the world and the fragility of wealth. He has watched his gold devalue currencies and his presence humble emperors. As he sits once more upon his ebony throne, surrounded by the familiar sights of his homeland, he looks at the books piled high in his library and the foreign scholars walking through his halls. The gold had been a bridge, a way to announce Mali's presence to the distant corners of the earth, but the return journey has brought something far more durable. The air in the palace is filled with the scent of burning incense and the soft rustle of pages being turned. Outside, the empire continues to pulse with life, the salt and gold trade flowing like the lifeblood of a great giant. But in the quiet moments of the evening, as the stars begin to peer through the clear desert sky, Musa reflects on the long road he has travelled. He thinks of the Nile, the markets of Cairo, and the white-robed crowds of Mecca. He has brought the world to the Niger, and in doing so, he has ensured that the name of Mali will never be forgotten. The wealth of the king is no longer measured in the weight of his treasury, but in the soaring minarets of his mosques and the silent, profound wisdom held within the thousands of manuscripts that now call the desert home, a legacy of stone and ink that will outlast even the greatest mountains of gold. The smell of fresh mud and drying timber drifts across the city on a cooling breeze, a scent that signifies not just construction, but a profound rebirth. Among the travellers returning in the king's wake is a man named Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, a poet and architect from Andalusia, whose mind is a treasury of geometric precision and elegant forms. Under the steady guiding hand of Mansa Musa, this visionary begins to translate the king's spiritual devotion into a physical reality that will redefine the skyline of the Sahel forever. The centerpiece of this transformation is the Jingwereba Mosque, a structure that rises from the earth like a great, living mountain of clay and wood. Unlike the stone cathedrals of the north, this mosque is built from the very soil of the Niger riverbanks, reinforced with limestone and heavy wooden beams that sprout from its walls like the branches of a sturdy acacia tree. These beams, known as toron, serve a dual purpose. They are both structural supports and permanent scaffolding, allowing craftsmen to climb the walls each year to apply a fresh layer of plaster, keeping the great edifice smooth and resilient against the desert winds. Inside, the air is cool and still, held by a forest of massive pillars that create a sense of infinite space, a quiet sanctuary where the heat of the African sun is forgotten in the soft, rhythmic murmur of prayer. Beside this house of worship, the king commissions a royal palace, the Madugu, a residence that reflects the newfound sophistication of his empire. It is a building of grand proportions, featuring a square tower topped with a dome and decorated with intricate carvings that blend the flowing lines of North African art with the bold, earthy textures of the local tradition. As the years pass, the golden dust of the Sahara settles into the crevices of these buildings, turning them a deep, warm ochre that seems to glow with an inner light during the long hours of the afternoon. This architectural revolution marks the birth of the Sudano-Sahelian style, a unique marriage of cultures that signals Timbuktu's transition from a seasonal camp of nomads to a permanent, shimmering jewel of the medieval world. But the beauty of Timbuktu is not merely found in its clay and timber. It is found in the quiet rustle of parchment and the steady scratching of reed pens. The University of Sankore, once a modest center of learning, begins to swell with the arrival of scholars from across the Islamic world, drawn by the king's legendary generosity and his insatiable hunger for knowledge. The university is not a single building, but a network of independent colleges centered around the Sankore Mosque, where the courtyards are filled with students sitting in circles at the feet of the world's most renowned jurists and theologians. It is said that in the markets of Timbuktu, books are sold for more gold than any other commodity. They are the true currency of the city, more precious than salt, more enduring than silk. Thousands upon thousands of manuscripts flow into the city, carried by camel caravans across the burning sands, containing the collective wisdom of humankind. Treatises on astronomy that map the movement of the stars, medical texts that describe the inner workings of the heart, and complex volumes of Islamic jurisprudence that seek to bring divine order to the affairs of men. The library of Sankore grows until it rivals the legendary collections of Alexandria or Baghdad, housing hundreds of thousands of individual works. In the dim light of the scriptoriums, scribes work with focused intensity, their hands moving gracefully across sheets of polished paper as they copy the masterworks of the age. There is a profound silence in these rooms, broken only by the occasional turning of a page or the soft sigh of a scholar lost in thought. For Mansa Musa, this is the ultimate achievement of his reign, not the conquest of lands, but the cultivation of the mind. He understands that while gold can be spent and empires can crumble, the pursuit of truth is a flame that, once lit, can never truly be extinguished. Meanwhile, the city itself becomes a living tapestry of global influences, a place where the boundaries between the local and the distant begin to blur into something entirely new. In the bustling districts surrounding the great mosques, one might hear the melodic tones of the Mandinka language mingling with the sharp, rhythmic cadences of Arabic, while the scents of exotic spices from the Maghreb drift through the air, mixing with the aroma of roasting grains and river fish. The king's architects continue to experiment, introducing the use of burnt bricks and flat roofs, techniques that slowly spread from the royal commissions to the homes of the wealthy merchants and the quarters of the visiting scholars. This blending of styles creates a city that feels both ancient and cutting edge, a place where the traditions of the desert meet the innovations of the Mediterranean. As the sun dips toward the horizon, casting long purple shadows across the sandy streets, the calls to prayer rise from the various quarters of the city, overlapping in a complex, haunting harmony. Timbuktu has become a beacon, a lighthouse of intellect and faith, situated at the very edge of the known world. It is a hub for the book trade that stretches as far as the printing presses of Europe and the courts of the Middle East, a place where a single manuscript might be traded for a fleet of camels or a king's ransom in gold. The scholars of Sankore are not merely students, they are the keepers of a global heritage, and their presence ensures that Mali is recognized not just for its wealth, but for its profound contribution to the story of human progress. The king often walks among these buildings in the quiet hours, perhaps reflecting on the journey that brought him here. He has seen the wonders of the world, and he has chosen to recreate them here, in the heart of his own land, using the very earth beneath his feet. There is a deep, rhythmic peace to the city during these years of the 14th century, a sense of a civilization reaching its zenith, where the physical and the spiritual are in perfect balance. The mosques are not just places of worship, but centers of community life, where the law is debated, where the poor are fed, and where the history of the people is preserved in oral traditions and written records alike. And so, Timbuktu transforms into a city of legends, a name whispered with awe in the markets of Venice and the schools of Granada. It is a place where the impossible seems ordinary, where a king of unimaginable riches chooses to invest his fortune in the invisible power of education and the enduring strength of faith. The transition from a desert outpost to a global metropolis is complete, and as the stars begin to emerge in the vast, clear sky above the Niger, the city settles into a watchful, scholarly slumber. The manuscripts are tucked away in their leather cases, the ink dries on the latest page of history, and the great clay walls of the Jingweraba Mosque stand as silent sentinels over a kingdom that has finally found its soul in the quiet beauty of the written word. The ink on the vellum of history has a way of shimmering long after the hand that held the pen has turned to dust. Imagine, if you will, a map spread across a heavy wooden table in the year 1375. This is the Catalan Atlas, a masterpiece of medieval cartography, and as the eye wanders across the vast golden expanses of the African continent, it settles upon a figure of undeniable gravity. There sits Mansa Musa, enthroned in the center of the world, draped in robes of deep crimson and gold. In one hand, he holds a scepter of office, and in the other, he balances a massive gleaming orb of pure gold. He is depicted not as a distant myth, but as a sovereign whose presence was so felt across the Mediterranean that he became the very symbol of wealth for the Western world. To the cartographers of Majorca, he was the king of the gold mines, a man of such immense fortune that his image was necessary to give the world its shape and its value. Modern economists and historians, armed with their spreadsheets and their complex calculations of inflation and purchasing power, often find themselves at a loss when trying to quantify the true extent of Musa's treasury. They look at the current price of gold, they weigh the output of the Bambouk and Bure mines, and they inevitably reach the same conclusion, that Mansa Musa was, quite simply, the wealthiest human being to ever walk the earth. They speak of fortunes exceeding $400 billion in today's currency, a number so vast that it ceases to be a measurement of money and becomes instead a measurement of gravity. Yet, to see him only through the lens of gold is to miss the quiet hum of the legacy he truly wished to leave behind. While the gold moved in great rhythmic waves across the sands, it was the spirit of the man that remained anchored in the soil of Mali. As the years passed, and the reign of the Lion of Mali eventually reached its natural twilight, the empire began to shift, as all great things must. History tells us that the towering heights of the Malian Empire began a slow, graceful descent after Musa's passing. Successors struggled to maintain the vast borders that stretched from the Atlantic to the Niger. The song of the empire grew fainter as internal rivalries and the rising power of the Songhai began to eclipse the glory of the Keita dynasty. The physical borders of the kingdom eventually receded, and the great palaces of gold and cedar slowly surrendered to the patient, shifting sands of the Sahel. But if we look closer, beyond the crumbling of stone and the fading of maps, we find that the cultural impact of Mansa Musa's reign did not vanish. It simply transformed. It became the very air that the region breathed. The libraries of Timbuktu did not disappear when the kings changed. Instead, they became the quiet heartbeat of West African intellectual life for centuries. The scholars he brought from Granada and Cairo stayed, their lineages intertwining with the local families, creating a tapestry of thought that bridged the gap between the Mediterranean and the heart of the savannah. The mosques he commissioned, with their unique blend of Sudano-Sahelian architecture, became the blueprint for a sacred landscape that survives to this very day. When you look at the rhythmic wooden beams protruding from the walls of the great mosque, you are not just looking at a building. You are looking at the physical manifestation of a king's dream to marry the earth of his home with the aspirations of his faith. There is a profound peace in realizing that the most enduring part of Musa's life was not the gold he gave away, but the knowledge he brought back. He understood perhaps better than any ruler before or since that material riches are a fleeting shadow, a sunset that eventually loses its color. Gold can be spent, it can be lost, and it can even devalue the very ground it touches, as the people of Cairo learned during his famous pilgrimage. But education and faith, these are the things that take root in the soul. They are the seeds that grow into a forest of stability, providing shade for generations yet unborn. As the stars continue their slow, silent rotation over the ruins of the old empire, one can almost feel the weight of that wisdom. The story of the Lion of Mali is a reminder that true power lies in the ability to change the way the world thinks. He turned a kingdom into a university, and a pilgrimage into a bridge between civilizations. Even now, as we drift towards sleep, the image of that king on the Catalan atlas remains a steady point of light in our historical memory. He sits there still, holding his golden coin, not as a hoarder of wealth, but as a gatekeeper of a golden age where the pursuit of God and the pursuit of knowledge were one and the same. The empire may have faded into the gentle haze of the past, but the dignity of his vision remains as solid as the clay of Jingwereba. As the night deepens and the world grows quiet, we can let go of the need to count and measure. The gold has long since been scattered, the caravans have reached their final destinations, and the great king has found his rest. What remains is the stillness, the quiet pride of a land that once showed the world the true meaning of abundance. It was an abundance of the heart, a richness of the mind, and a legacy that transcends the simple shine of metal. The desert wind whispers through the empty corridors of time, carrying with it the names of poets and astronomers, the soft turning of pages, and the steady rhythmic pulse of a history that refused to be forgotten. The legacy of Mansa Musa is a soft blanket over the history of the world, a story of a man who had everything and chose to use it to build something eternal. In the vast, dark silence of the African night, the spirit of the lion still lingers, watching over the scholars, the dreamers, and those who seek the light of understanding. And so, the Golden King fades into the starlight, leaving us with the comforting thought that the greatest treasures are never those we hold in our hands, but those we leave behind in the hearts and minds of others. The world is quiet now. The gold is at rest. The king is at peace. And as you drift into your own quiet slumber, may you find a similar richness in the stillness of the night, a wealth of peace that no map can chart and no treasury can contain. Sleep now, while the history of the world continues its long, slow, and beautiful journey through the dark.